Hey yo, what's good though? Soul here, and welcome back to the story mode. So, as it stands, we are 100% officially in downtime era while we await our next big major update or anything in regards to Generation 10, aka Pokemon Winds and Waves. Although, there is one final thing that I would like to talk about, and I did want to open the discussion up to everybody. In my community tab, I asked you guys what kind of gimmick you would like to see or what kind of gimmick you think we might receive in Pokemon Winds and Waves. If that's something that you're potentially interested in jumping into a discussion about, then make sure to either join up in the Discord and make sure to reply to my prompt there so that you can get your response prioritized, or you can just go right over to the community tab on YouTube and make sure to put your reply down, and I will get to as many of those responses as humanly possible. We'll probably try to get to that one within the next week. We'll see what the responses look like. Focusing on today's specific topic though, I wanted to do something more on the fun side. Because you gotta consider the fact that we are about to hit a massive milestone next year with Generation 10. Meaning that, looking back, we have come an extremely long way with this franchise. Ups and downs, highs and lows, we are still very much here, whether we want to admit that to ourselves or not. We love this damn franchise. Now, the thing about love is that it's an extremely complex feeling. You can't really say that you truly love something until you fully understand it. Or at least, that's usually how it works for me. Love and hate are two sides of the same coin. I can't simply love or hate something unless I truly feel like I understand it enough. So, in the case of Pokemon, something that I grew up with, I think it's more than fair to say I have a very deep love-hate relationship with this franchise. Obviously, if you've been here long enough, you already know that. You guys have heard me talk about this franchise for almost too long now. That being said, I decided to go ahead and have fun with this little two-parter idea that I have. As you've very clearly seen from the title and thumbnail, I wanted to talk about the best and worst things to come out of every generation of Pokemon so far. Within pretty much every major Pokemon title, there was always something that was pretty good, great, awesome even, and then there were things that were simply far from that. So I wanted to go through, constantly flip the coin for every generation and talked about my favorite aspects and my least favorite aspects. Simple as that. Now, what makes this a two-parter is the fact that I am pretty much mostly going based solely off of memory. At this point in time, it's been a very long time since I have sat down and played through every single generation of Pokemon. I would like to take advantage of this long downtime and go revisit those games that I haven't played in recent years. Obviously, unless you guys want retrospectives, I'm probably not gonna do something like that. But what I am likely to do probably around this time next year is essentially go through all of the games again and see whether or not everything that I say here still holds up or if it's completely wrong. Also, I say next year because we're all under the assumption right now that Pokemon Winds and Waves likely drops at the end of 2027. But I've yammered on enough. Why don't you go ahead, get nice and cozy, grab a nice cool glass of pear juice straight from the fridge, no ice in this house, you already know. Got a nice bowl of Mudsdale Katsu served over rice with some mayonnaise on there. Go ahead and chow down comfortably while we talk about the best and worst things to come out of every generation of Pokemon. Naturally, we're gonna go ahead and kick things off with Generation 1. Now, funny enough, I did actually revisit Generation 1 extremely recently. No joke, I went out and bought a Game Boy Pocket with a copy of Pokemon Blue and was running through that for like 3 weeks straight. I gotta say, after everything that we've been through when it comes to Pokemon, it was extremely nice to revisit its roots. No strategy, no complexities, simply my Mon is probably stronger than your Mon, let's box and find out. Simple as that. And I absolutely loved that about it. At this point in time, I'm not technically finished. I still need to do the Elite Four and the Champion, but you know, we've done it so many times at this point, you know, it's not like I don't know what's going on, right? So, the best aspect of Generation 1 probably has to be the fact that it introduced us to Pokemon. That's probably a pretty fair thing to say, right? Without the popularity of the original Pokemon Red and Blue, we would not have this franchise the way that we do. Despite its many missteps and mishandlings with the series in a lot of different ways, I'm glad that it's here at all, and I have these games to thank for that. I know that a lot of people were suffering from Generation 1 fatigue for a very long time because of all the remakes and all the revisits to the Kanto region and stuff like that, but I think for Pokemon fans, it would be a really good cleanse every now and again to just pick up that original Game Boy if you can, and just keep it on deck with you at all times so that whenever you have a little bit of downtime or free time in between work or class or whatever, you can just whip that bad boy out and just have some fun. I can't even lie, I found myself busting that sucker out at work sometimes because it was just that fun. So, I reiterate, I'm glad that the series is here. It is not perfect, but I love it anyway. Now, the worst thing about Generation 1 was easily the bag space. As fun as the playthrough was, it was definitely showing its age when I had such heavy limitations on the bag space and I had to like manually change the box to fit more Pokemon. That was crazy stuff to me. Receiving any form of key item and not being able to put them away in the PC or delete them entirely means that every time you got a plot-centric key item that you needed to progress the game, you were diminishing your bag space permanently, which means that you had to constantly sit down and analyze very heavily what items were critical that you needed and what items you didn't all the time, so that when you came across something on a new route, you didn't have to completely ignore it. There were times where I was just giving TMs to my Pokemon just to make sure I had enough space to grab the next couple of things that were in my path. That and, you know, making sure I had enough space for Pokeballs and potions and revives and whatever else. Overall, frustrating. Mostly manageable, but frustrating. Despite that though, my most recent playthrough of Generation 1 was a very pleasant time. It sucks that it's been aged out, so much so that when we did receive like the closest thing to original Generation 1 on Switch, we got Fire Red and Leaf Green, which were the remakes, which honestly, I think was probably the right call, because that is simply probably the best way to play Generation 1 that isn't Let's Go, and I wouldn't recommend Let's Go. Moving on, we have Generation 2. I have not played Generation 2 in a long time. Hell, it's been a long time since I've sat down with Heart Gold and Soul Silver, let alone Gold, Silver, and Crystal. Obviously though, since I am rocking the Game Boy Pocket, that's going to change. But anyway, why don't we go ahead and focus on what I do remember, starting with the best aspects. For one thing, the use of a second region was always a fun idea. Being able to expand on your journey that much by going back to the region that you explored previously a year prior with completely different settings and stuff like that, really neat concept. Searching for Pokemon in familiar grass and whooping some familiar ass, it was a great time. And working your way through just to fight the one man who did it all, you, Red? That's the toughest thing imaginable, I think. That Gold versus Red fight is glazed to hell and back, but good lord, I'm not gonna sit here and lie and tell you that that's not one of the hypest moments in Pokemon canon by and far. Granted, I think that that moment hits a little bit more in the remake, specifically because it's been a much more significant time likely since you had played Generation 1 at that point, so it probably, you know, felt a little bit more nostalgic as opposed to back then when you originally played through Red and Blue and then you had to play through it basically a second time. But I still think that it's a special thing that they did, and I feel like a lot of people can agree because we are waiting to have literally anything remotely like that in any form of modern game. How is it that we have yet to explore an entire second region in another one of these games yet? It's pretty uncanny, it's crazy. Another very sick thing about Generation 2 is the fact that they introduced not only additional evolutions, but prior evolutions as well. One could argue that introducing something like Pichu is kind of a pointless endeavor, but in reality, in my personal opinion, I think it makes the connection to the Pokemon that I've been raising that much stronger. And by the time I do evolve that Pichu into a Pikachu, it is much more balanced. I have a much more desired moveset on it already. And then obviously there's very little downside to giving something like Golbat the evolution into Crobat. It gives one of the more common Pokemon that you can run into during your general playthroughs of one of these games a little bit more leniency, a little bit more power, something more to look forward to. And I'm really glad that that trend continued, because now we have situations like Girafarig, who was solid on its own, but now with the evolution into Farigiraf, we have a little bit more power to play with, and that is just excellent all around. It gives the opportunity for Pokemon who don't get the chance to shine in the limelight nearly as often as Pokemon who do have 2 to 3 stage evolutions a little bit more time. And I just think that that's a beautiful thing. I'm very happy that they introduced it here. So now we go ahead and flip the coin, and I personally believe that one of the weakest aspects about Generation 2 is its story. Say what you will about the cool and neat lore and theming behind the legendary dogs and the tower and Lugia and Ho-Oh, that's all background stuff. It adds to the general lore and atmosphere of the Johto region, and I think that that's sick as hell. My problem simply lies within the fact that outside of that stuff, there is absolutely no story. The revival of Team Rocket was barely a revival. And I am almost positive I've mentioned this like a million times on this channel, that one of my biggest pet peeves about this franchise was the fact that they completely underutilized Silver. The fact that they actually had a dickhead rival that was somehow meaner than Blue was already astounding, but the fact that they didn't take advantage of that and utilize Silver as a way to help revitalize Team Rocket and make him a lot scarier, that just seems like wasted potential to me. And then on top of that, in later titles, the fact that they kind of revealed the fact that he is Giovanni's son and they just never did anything with that is truly the craziest thing about this series to me. Like, are we serious? The son of one of the most notorious crime bosses in the entirety of the franchise, and he's just completely underutilized? That's so sad. That's so unfortunate. Other than that, the entire equivalent to a story when it comes to Gold and Silver was just the occasional run-ins with remnants of Team Rocket that weren't even doing anything unmanageable. Like, it was just kind of whatever. I'm gonna say it, I'm sorry, but Johto is completely carried by vibes. And there's nothing inherently wrong with that, but that's something that we gotta admit to ourselves, okay? Okay, moving on. Next up, we've got Generation 3. Now, I'll be honest, it's been a criminally long time since I've fully sat down with Generation 3 all the way through as well. The last time I played it was probably at least like a year or two ago when I was getting footage for something very specific, and I didn't get too far into that playthrough, so my knowledge on this one is a little bit more dated. I definitely have to go back and revisit it. But as far as my positives go, from what I do remember, I recall having a lot of fun generally with the sprite work in the game and just loving the general color and vibrancy of it. At the time, I hadn't yet played the Minish Cap, so I didn't really have any other big, major, high-quality GBA games to compare it to outside of like Dragon Ball Boost Fury or anything like that. But even then, I think it still does a good job standing the general test of time when it comes to its graphical style. I do love how the overall region of Hoenn looks. Next to that, the introduction of careers outside of the gym challenge, primarily contests. Now, in all honesty, I myself did not participate in contests that much when I was younger, obviously because I was more interested in just general battling and stuff like that, and I didn't care to learn the mechanics for contests. But now that I'm older, looking back, that is definitely something I've neglected and something that I look back on and think fondly of, because I'm glad it's there at all. Hopefully one day they revisit the idea of other careers outside of the gym challenge that people can pursue within their Pokemon career, and hopefully we can get something out of that. Maybe they could bring contests back, maybe they can introduce something else as a potential career path. Who knows? But I'm glad it exists, and hopefully we see something like it again in future titles. And then lastly, I think I was extremely pleased with the fact that they made a real attempt at a more focused story. Within the region, they had two completely opposing factors within Team Magma and Team Aqua, two groups with very different goals and ideals that were completely opposing of each other, and it made for a conflict that was extremely interesting that pretty much caught the entirety of Hoenn in the middle of it. I thought the idea was generally really cool. The team leaders, Maxie and Archie, had a lot of personality between them, so it was fun to see them bicker in Emerald and things like that. I think it was just a nice juxtaposition, especially when you compare it to Generations 1 and 2, where Generation 1 had a crime boss that wanted to lord over everyone. Simple as that, just a power struggle, nothing crazy or deep about that. And then Generation 2, which was just the remnants of that, did not really take that as far as they could have. Generation 3 actually tried to do something and actually used a lot of different characters and stuff like that, and I can appreciate that a lot. Now, when you flip the coin over, again, it's been a little while since I've played, but the last time I did play, the one thing I do remember was thinking how frustrating it was getting around these routes without surf, because a lot of their designs were very heavily based around water. I know that the general meme amongst the Pokemon community is the 7 out of 10 too much water thing, but there is a little bit of truth to that, because I remember going through just for a little bit to get some footage, and I was thinking to myself, wow, I forgot that this game does not open up truly until you get your hands on Surf, because the landlocked situation there is much worse than any other region, which understandable because of where it takes place. Hoenn is more water than anything else. It's big islands more than anything, but it's still like so heavily just limiting, for lack of a better way to put it. Of course, it's not the biggest deal in the world, and it's definitely not something that you notice upon earlier playthroughs. When I was younger, that's not something I paid attention to, but it was later when I wanted to go somewhere or get something or do something, and I realized I couldn't do certain things until I got Surf, and it was really, really frustrating. But still, doesn't take away from the general enjoyment, and when you do inevitably get Surf, it's like an entirely different game. So yeah, still a lot of fun. I really like Generation 3. Fun fact, the first Pokemon game that I ever fully completed was Pokemon Sapphire. I actually stole that from a kid back in elementary school and never gave it back, and I had an amazing time with it and rekindled my love for Pokemon after that. So yeah, it's thanks to Generation 3 really that I'm here where I am, in all honesty. So I guess you could say I have a little bit of a soft spot for it. What can I say? It's good stuff. And now we finally move on to Generation 4, my personal favorite of the bunch. There's a lot of very good takeaways from Generation 4. For example, Shinx. And I'm barely kidding either. I know that generally speaking, Luxray is generally outclassed by a lot of other electric type Pokemon, but it's still my favorite design wise. I just love this thing, and it would be my partner absolutely if Pokemon were a thing. Simple as that. Moving along, one of the more general best things to come out of Generation 4 was definitely the physical special split. This is something that I've learned to appreciate extremely recently because of my recent playthrough of Generation 1. Things felt so unorganized and just kind of messy without that, and I did not realize how nice it was to have this feature. And I thank the stars every day now that Generation 4 was where they decided to lock in for whatever reason on this. It also made the games a lot more technically tactical, so something like Pokemon Champions can only exist comfortably because we have this. And I am more than glad for that. Flipping the coin over, easily the worst thing about Generation 4, especially in the originals, is its pacing. Good God. Generation 4 is notorious for being just insanely slow about everything. The technical and mechanical aspects of the gameplay are slow because of how slowly you receive experience and how slowly the bar goes down after you hit a Pokemon. And in higher levels, it is miserable. As much as I loathe the remakes for existing the way that they do, at the very least, it made the original experiences for Diamond and Pearl much faster, and that in of itself is a huge bonus. But it doesn't really stop there. As much as I like the story, it is very slow paced. And I'm somebody that's generally really patient with that kind of a thing, so for me to say that, you know, as much as I love Generation 4, yeah, it's definitely a slower paced game. But hey, like I said at the very beginning of this, to love something is to know what it's working with, is to know it through and through, flaws and all. Because despite the flaws that it does present here, I still love this region. I love its music, I love its atmosphere, I love the Pokemon designs, especially because it gave me one of my favorites of all time, and it's just something that I grew up heavily with. So yeah, Generation 4, always on top for me. Moving along, we have made it to Generation 5. It's also been way too long since I have fully sat down with Generation 5, I fear. I will say though, I do recall enjoying it a lot my first couple times through when I was younger. Starting with the positives, one of the things that stood out the most, even during the marketing period, was the fact that we had animated flashy sprites. A lot of old heads will probably tell you that this specifically is where Pokemon graphically peaked, and they'll continuously say that Pokemon needs to go back to 2D and it needs to look like this or that or yada yada yada. They're usually referring to Generation 5, and in all honesty, it's kind of a hard argue. If we were to go back to 2D, this would be kind of ideal. Obviously, we're living in an age with the HD 2D era, so it would probably look something like that maybe, but I kind of get what they're getting at when they say stuff like that. Design-wise, specifically for the Pokemon at the very least, it was one of the times where they looked their absolute best. I can't really argue. Like, when I tell you, I will genuinely never forgive what they did to my boy Electros after Generation 5. It made me sick to my stomach to have to see that. Oh, goodness me. And this isn't even mentioning all of the crazy set pieces and landmarks that they utilize different camera angles for in that game. They cooked pretty heavily, I can't lie. So long and short of it is definitely higher regarded in terms of graphical quality for sure. Also, you can't not mention the fact that we got infinite TMs in this generation. Say what you will about that aspect, I think that's easily one of the best conveniences they have ever added to the mechanics of Pokemon. Because of this decision, in modern games, I never have to worry about teaching it to a Pokemon and then ending up with another Pokemon that would be better for my team and not being able to fill out their moveset because I already wasted that TM. I can use it as much as I want. That's perfectly fine with me. I think that's a just good, convenient aspect. And even next to these two, I think one of the most important positives about Generation 5 is that to this day, I still think it's safe to say that it has one of the strongest stories in the franchise. Ghetsis, Team Plasma, and their general ideals were the only ones in the entirety of the franchise that wasn't just straight up cartoonishly evil. The liberation of Pokemon is something that you actually had to sit down and consider a little bit. Like, are we really like enslaving these Pokemon? Are they really in danger because of humanity like that? Are we the problem? I think it's good, especially in younger audiences' media, to test morality sometimes and really make them think about something like that. Like, very clearly, yes, the way that they were going about it was wrong, but it is something that you have to consider. But ultimately, obviously, Pokemon wouldn't be working with people if they didn't like what was going on. They could easily overpower humanity, but they decided to work alongside them to help build up their world together. That's the whole point. Don't get it twisted though, even in the realm of Pokemon, there are some sick humans out there. Obviously, pretty much all of the antagonists across the board in Pokemon, straight up. But I think it's good that they made us think a lot more than usual when it comes to a story within Pokemon. That's all I could ask for. And another big positive to me personally is the fact that Generation 5 was the first ever to give us actual genuine sequels. I mentioned this in a video a long time ago that I personally, if I had to choose, would definitely take sequels over remakes going forward. Like, yeah, it's always cool to come back to a region and see what it would have looked like in this modern era of Pokemon and just general gaming. But after we've seen what we've seen with like Pokemon Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl, for example, I think we're starting to need a little bit more than that because we've already seen these games. We've played through them thoroughly and we understand them to a T now. We need newer content to justify re-getting these games, especially in that specific case where the definitive edition from 2009 holds up better than the ones that released in 2021. I digress. Sequels are just generally a lot more interesting as a concept. I want to see what kind of new faces are there, gym challenge and all. I want to see what kind of new Pokemon might have moved in, new or old. I want to see how things might have changed, what kind of new stories could be presented there. Pokemon Black 2 and White 2, as an example, gave me a good reason to come back. And I'm happy that it happened at all. It really sucks that it was just too early for its time and a lot of people were just not messing with Generation 5 at that point in time, so they just kind of got scared about doing something like that again, which is why we ended up with more definitive editions or middle versions or whatever you want to call them down the line. But it's no mystery as to why I absolutely adored Legends EA as a concept, because it literally gave me everything I could have wanted from that concept. So even though it didn't happen often afterwards, I'm very glad that Generation 5 did try something like that. Now, I'll be honest, I could not think of any like major off-rip heavy flaws in regards to Generation 5 specifically. So I did kind of cheat on this one. I wanted to see what other people generally thought, and a lot of them were saying that they had a big problem with the balancing issue with the Pokemon that were available in Generation 5. To my understanding, Generation 5 still holds the crown of most new Pokemon introduced in a generation. And because of that, it seems like they really wanted to take advantage of that and make it so that pretty much across the board during your journey, you were mostly utilizing brand new Pokemon. That's like all you were running into. Obviously though, I did not have a problem with this. Even on repeat playthroughs, that was never like a massive deal to me. I could probably kind of get where you're getting at with that, but I never thought that that was the biggest deal, in all honesty. Maybe once I go back through it and do like a very bare bones, like no randomizer playthrough of Generation 5, I might feel differently about that situation, but I can't imagine it would be that big of a problem now at all. I'm already pretty well attuned to Generation 5's like selection of Pokemon, so I can't imagine I would be mad about something like that. Not to say that the game is completely rid of flaws or anything like that. This is definitely probably not a perfect game, but I need to go back through. It's been too long. Moving on, we are now on Generation 6. Now this I actually did play through within my recent year. Was planning on doing like a little revisited video, and then I didn't do it and Legends EA came out or something. I don't remember the process, sorry. Point is, my memory on this one is a little more fresh. One of the biggest positives about Generation 6, something that nobody will fight or deny, is the fact that we got our introduction to gimmicks through Mega Evolution. Like I said, I was not really on like the discussion side of the internet during this time, so when it came out, I just played the game and had a generally good time. But I have to imagine one of the things that people were seeing was the fact that people were kind of getting fed up with the more stale combat that we had with Pokemon up to that point, because it generally been the same thing, just kind of type matchups and advantages and things like that. So they decided to shake things up with the concept of Mega Evolution, something that to this day is still regarded as the most interesting gimmick in Pokemon. Obviously, I like Mega Evolution. I don't think that we should have just only exclusively had Mega Evolution for the entirety of the franchise. That would have gotten really boring. But I do think that it was a phenomenal kickoff to additional mechanics that could help us in battle. Something that added a completely new tactical aspect that made battles much more fun and entertaining. Another extremely important aspect is the fact that this was our introduction to customization within the Pokemon franchise. As a young black man, finally being able to play as a character in Pokemon with my skin color was absolutely glorious. Frankly, it took way too long to get to that point, but I'm glad we've had it ever since then. On top of that, being able to actually stylize the trainer, wear whatever we want. I mean, you know, I say wear whatever with a grain of salt, but still, it's something, and I'll gladly take what I can get in that regard. Overall, very critical feature that I am extremely glad got added and they continued working with down the line. Another important aspect is absolutely the fact that we got not only Pokemon Ami, but hyper training. Pokemon Ami is one of those mechanics that reminds you why you love Pokemon to begin with, and it's for these little freaky creatures. These are supposed to be friends, and up to that point, we never really had super in-depth mechanics that allowed us to acknowledge that, to really interact and bond with them outside of just battling alongside them. This is probably one of the things that should have been introduced in way earlier games. Now, in modern titles, we don't specifically have Pokemon Ami, but we have the bones of it in other ways, and I think that that's special in its own right. And then hyper training as a general concept has made it so much better to train Pokemon that they have found easier and easier ways to do it, and that's just a very beautiful thing. But specifically in Generation 6, I think in 7 as well, we were able to actively play sports. Like, why can we not do that now in more modern titles? That is the craziest aspect to me. Long and short, I love the fact that we had hyper training introduced in those games. I just love that they had it the way that they did in Generation 6. It sucks that we didn't continue with it like that, but I'm happy it was there at all. Now, we're gonna go ahead and flip the coin, right? And probably one of my biggest gripes with Generation 6 was simply how easy it was going back through. Mind you, I was doing a randomizer on my most recent playthrough, and I felt like I was cooking everything in my path pretty much mindlessly. I always think back to when somebody mentioned the fact that there was not a single trainer that had a full team of 6 to combat you in the game, and that is the most hilarious thing, especially on repeat playthroughs. Obviously, this was definitely where they went a little bit heavier on the aspect of introducing Pokemon to newer players and making it very entry friendly for a lot of people, so they didn't want to, you know, raise that bar too high. And obviously, Pokemon has never had difficulty options or anything like that. So overall, the game was just a little bit of a coaster, and even if you were to turn the experience share off, it just makes your team extremely imbalanced. One thing I do remember acknowledging on my first playthrough though was the fact that the rivals were easily the most boring in the franchise, and I think I still agree with that to this day. The only name I even remember from that group is Tierno, and the only reason for that is because we work with his sister in Pokemon Legends ZA, because otherwise I would never remember his name, nor do I remember the other two. And I played through this game recently, mind you. Now, there's a lot of people out there that will say that one major negative is the fact that this was our introduction to 3D in Pokemon. And I'm kind of on the fence about that personally, because I'm like, look, yeah, while Pokemon in 3D still has yet to truly wow and stun and amaze us like it has the potential and power to do, I don't think that sticking solely with pixel art and 2D would have been completely the wave. That never would have lasted as long as you think it would have. So it's kind of a hit or miss situation because realistically, Pokemon has never been about its graphics like that, unfortunately. Thankfully though, I'm sane, and that's not something that I am entirely focused on, and it won't ruin my general experience if the game isn't the prettiest thing I've ever seen. It's okay, the games are still fun. So we'll probably do a more in-depth video on this soon enough because I do have all the footage just kind of sitting there, so I probably should do something with it, right? But Generation 6 overall is a pretty middle-of-the-lane experience for me. I like the fact that it introduced stuff like gimmicks, like Pokemon and Me, and things along those lines. But it had super bare-bones characters on whatever story, and it was way too easy. But hey, you know what? The music was fire, so, you know, that's gotta be at least a half point, right? We'll talk about it later. Now we move on to Generation 7, another generation it has been decades since I have touched. Starting with the positives, I think it's overall just a very general improvement on pretty much every aspect introduced in Generation 6. I mean, if we're completely honest, Z moves were a very obvious downgrade from Mega Evolution, but it was still a cool concept overall, I think. But graphically speaking, it was a little bit more fleshed out than Generation 6 was. The characters were miles more interesting and much more reoccurring. And to my memory, it had a solid story, just a good time all around. So just generally pretty much an all-around improvement on all those aspects. Probably one of the most important positives that Generation 7 brings though is the fact that they introduced us to the concept of regional variants. Because frankly, once they did that, that opened up the door to a world of possibilities for Pokemon that are simply just lacking or a little behind the times. We have seen Pokemon go from completely useless to like damn near competitive viable because of regional variants. And now because of that, every new major title or generation of Pokemon we get to look forward to what new regional variants we could be looking forward to. There are so many Pokemon out there that are just completely underutilized and need another chance, and a regional variant could absolutely give them that chance. One of the biggest things it gave us was the fact that this is where we started getting rid of HMs, and I was just over the moon about that. This was the first game where you did not need to have an HM slave, and that was a beautiful, beautiful thing. Far and gone were the days of that one Pokemon just sitting in the back sucking up all the experience from the team that you would only use exclusively to get around the world utilizing HMs. Without HMs, there was really no need for a move tutor or anything like that either, which, in all honesty, you know, it was kind of a waste of time, and I'm glad we don't have to worry about stuff like that anymore. Overall, just a fire move for the franchise. I'm glad we don't have to deal with it anymore. Alternatively, on the negative side, the one thing that upset me the most about Generation 7 was specifically Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon. By technicality, yes, those are very much the definitive editions of Generation 7 with a bit more content. The problem lies in the fact that literally 75% of the game is still exactly the same as Sun and Moon. Hell, 75% might be generous, it might be 85. Cause like DLC was a thing at that point on the 3DS, right? They could have easily made a bunch of updates and add-ons to the original Sun and Moon. Like, what do you mean we were paying full price for the exact same game a year later? That was where I was like starting to draw the line a little bit. I was like, wait a minute, what's going on here? Had me thinking about slimy business practices at the ripe age of 15 or 16 or something like that. Regardless, after that is where we stopped receiving definitive editions altogether, but I feel like we are past the need for them now, right? Don't get it twisted though, the overall negative business decisions never stopped, but you know, at least that one did. Moving on, we have Generation 8. It has been an absurd amount of time since I have touched Generation 8. It's one of the few that I feel less inclined to pretty much ever go back to, if I'm being completely honest. Don't get me wrong, it has a lot of neat aspects and concepts to it, but growing older and looking back on it, I just don't have as much of an attachment to that title as I would have liked. I truly believe that the prime, most important positive thing to come out of this was the aspect of raid battles as more multiplayer content. I think that bringing raid battles from Pokemon Go into the mainline titles was easily one of the most genius moves they have ever made with the franchise. It added so much replayability, a lot of unique strategy, and the multiplayer and community aspects of it are just a massive bonus for the franchise. Obviously, it still has yet to be perfected, but to be fair, they've only done it in 2 major generations so far. Maybe once we get it back, probably in Winds and Waves, we could see another additional aspect to it that could make it even smoother. But raid battles are the sole reason that I have like 400 to 500 hours in that game. Well, that and a lot of shiny hunting, but mostly raid battles. They definitely did a lot better with it in Generation 9. I can't wait to see what they do in Generation 10. Raid battles are one of my favorite aspects now, straight up. Now, if I could be just a little dramatic, flipping the coin over to the negatives, there's a couple of aspects about Generation 8 that are almost offensive in a couple of ways, and it's why I'm not as keen about the idea of going back to those games. For example, the fact that there is like no story in that game whatsoever. I recently played a game like within the last week that had such an offensively boring story and cast that I actually could not continue playing it. Now, obviously, I've played a lot of games in my time, and I'm fully aware of the fact that story and characters are a major driving force for me. But one of the things that made me realize that was Generation 8, because that game is so offensively whack in terms of story. At the very least, one of the things Pokemon is good at a lot of the time is character design and personalities and stuff like that. Not like they carried or anything like that, but they were bearable enough. But god damn, boy, that game gave us a fat nothing burger in terms of a story or a plot. It was like you were pretty much watching Leon do everything you were supposed to be doing. And that was really annoying. The antagonist was bum as hell. I don't know. There just wasn't much of a driving force within that game, other than, you know, the fact that it was simply Pokemon. On top of that, I think easily the most offensive thing was the Dex cut. I don't know if they're still watching my videos, but there is one individual I know whose ears perked up at that very particular sentence. But the thing is, it's not even the fact that the Dex did actually get minimalized, because, you know, realistically, there's no way they could fit all of those Pokemon into a regional Dex in one game comfortably like that and still get the game out on time. I understand, I get it, but at the same time, don't lie to us and say that things are going to be improved in sacrifice of those Pokemon that didn't make it. Not when the wild area, the one wild area that we have through the bulk of the game, looks the way it does. Don't do that. The infamous Score Bunny double kick thing was the funniest thing for months to me, bro. I just think that they really shot themselves in the foot with that and made Generation 8 one of the weakest games in the franchise because of that setup. Or at least that's how it feels to me. I'm just generally not attached to that generation like that. And finally, we have reached Generation 9. You guys have heard me talk about this game almost too much at this point. So I'm gonna keep it real simple. If you ever want to see all of my thoughts on Scarlet and Violet in particular, my entire channel for like 2 straight years is exactly that. Anyway, a major positive that this game certainly brings is the aspect and potential of open world Pokemon games. Obviously, to a kid, we're not really paying attention to something like the aspect of open world because every game felt somewhat open world to us to a degree. It wasn't until we got older and started really comparing the technicalities between actual open world games and more linear titles to one another, which is why Generation 9, being Pokemon's first open world title, is a glimpse to what the future can actually look like. Big, open fields that you could go in and out of without having to worry about a loading screen. Hundreds of trainers and wild Pokemon on every route waiting to box. Massive cities and towns that you could go in and out of, full of life and NPCs and different activities to participate in. Now, obviously I'm getting ahead of myself. Scarlet and Violet very obviously did not deliver on a lot of that stuff like they probably could have, but the idea is there, and we have yet to see a fully realized open world Pokemon game just yet. Maybe Winds and Waves can really help fix that. Alternatively though, on the negative side of things, the act of releasing a very clearly unfinished game set a very negative precedent for Pokemon Company and Game Freak. Obviously, a lot of games prior to Scarlet and Violet were not in functioning order like they could have been on day one, mostly referring to Sword and Shield, but it was nowhere near as badly functioning as Scarlet and Violet was day one. Never mind that the story was fun, never mind that we had a lot of unique introduced Pokemon and a really fun new mechanic to play around with in terrestrialization, it did not matter because the game barely worked and it was too hard for people to get into because of that. As a Kingdom Hearts fan, it was incredibly appalling to also be a Pokemon fan that wants a game to be held back as much as possible. This was not a practice that we wanted to continue, which is why everybody seeing that release date for Pokemon Winds and Waves had them lit up like a Christmas tree, because they have way more time than we thought on their hands to develop that game. Thank Shanks for that. But no, the release of Scarlet and Violet Frame 1 back in 22 was easily one of the worst things to happen in the franchise, and something like that should never, can never happen again. Say what you will about Legends EA, I do think that the base game is actually phenomenal. It's just a little repetitive and definitely held back graphically because it was initially a Switch 1 title. I truly do think that it just got such harsh backlash because it was coming hot off the heels of Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. At that point in time, people were a lot less patient and a lot more critical with Pokemon. So Legends EA had a lot riding on it, especially because they took a full year off in 24. But overall, yeah, them releasing the game in that state was completely unacceptable, and we're going to be looking towards them to do so much better from now on. And hopefully that extra year off and this complete silent year for Pokemon will do a lot of wonder for Winds and Waves. That being said though, it does appear that I have generally gone through the entire list of things and aspects of the best and worst things to come out of every generation of Pokemon so far. Now, if anybody's still around a solid year from now while we're in the hype period for Pokemon Winds and Waves, make sure to remind me to come back to this video so that I could officially do that next follow-up. But again, I'm gonna spend a lot of time this year and likely next year kind of revisiting those games and seeing what opinions change based on what I experienced in my grown age with these games, right? But we'll likely talk about that once we actually get to that point. Overall, I still absolutely adore this franchise with all my heart. I'm gonna be here probably till my final breath if we're being honest, because Pokemon is simply way too special to me to ever truly abandon. And even with this list here, with all the negatives and stuff that I've mentioned, obviously I mentioned a lot of the positives as well, because there are good aspects about these games. And hopefully they continue to learn and grow and understand this franchise and actually get a little bit more time and money to produce what they want to produce. Hopefully we are looking at a major shift with Winds and Waves, with it being the next major 10th generation of Pokemon. They really got to lock in for this one, because this one is way too important to mess up, or at least that's what I believe. But hey, you know what, maybe that's just me. So that just about does it for this one. This one was way longer than I intended, and now it's gonna be a beast to edit, and I'm gonna have to find time to do that because I am very sleep deprived right now, but we'll go ahead and figure it out. Also, again, as a quick reminder, I am doing that response video for gimmicks that we would like to see in Winds and Waves. Make sure to respond to that prompt in the community tab on YouTube, or if you want to feel like, you know, more prioritized with your response, make sure to join up in the Discord and respond directly to my prompt there in the video tabs tab, so that we can, you know, get that rocking probably within the next week or so. And I'm going to put the link in the description this time for anybody that cares. I do have an official TikTok page that is going to be pretty much highlights of everything that I post here, or stream highlights and stuff like that, because I will be trying to stream more. I want to stream dually or cross stream on TikTok as well as YouTube going forward, primarily for second channel, because I want to play a lot of games and I want to, you know, just keep doing that more often, because it's so fun streaming with you guys and I don't do it enough. So I want to take advantage and do that more. So make sure to follow the TikTok page in the description below. I'm so out of it. I gotta get out of here and I gotta start editing now, and maybe even record a second video because I'm super behind. But regardless, I'm passing the mic in your direction. I want you guys to tell me everything that you're thinking in the comment section below. Do you agree that what I've said and listed here are some of the best and worst aspects of Pokemon as a whole? These are things that you can absolutely agree with, whether it's positives, whether it's negatives. You feel generally the same about this franchise in these different ways, or Are you on the opposing side? I am completely wrong about what's good and what's bad about Pokemon. I don't understand a single thing about it, and you have a better list. Tell me everything that you guys are thinking in the comment section below, because you know for a fact that I'm always gonna be down there with you guys. But with that, it appears to be skedaddle o'clock, so I'm gonna go ahead and get the hell up out of here. I'd like to thank you guys ever so much for watching. I truly do hope you enjoyed. Do me the greatest favor of dropping a like and a comment, and consider subscribing for more content just like this here. And with that, I'm Gonzo. Thanks again, hope you enjoyed, and I'll be seeing you guys in the next video. Do me the greatest favor of taking good ass care, and I'll see you all next time. Bye!
So rude, can't handle us. So cool, baby, scandalous. I'll show you what I'm talking about. So cool, baby, watch it now. It's a you.